Hi, welcome back to the All Things Special About Education podcast. I am Shannon, the Executive Director of Kentucky IEP Advocate. This is Andrea, board member at Kentucky IEP Advocate, and we are going to continue our conversation today about access and how access is more than just a front door, how that relates to universal design, and how universal design could be incorporated at school.
We talked a little bit in the last episode about universal design. Maybe we could start today with just defining universal design and giving some examples of what that looks like. And I'll let you do that since you're a little more eloquent than I am, and I'm still learning.
So universal design as a whole is the practice of designing products, services, and programs in ways that will meet the needs of the most people, regardless of their age or ability. So you're looking at designing something with more than just an able-bodied young person in mind. And you're also looking at designing a product that could be used with for used by people who have a range of abilities and disabilities and also are any age. So it isn't always this, and this. It is one piece of technology, one piece of the program, one way something is designed that meets the needs of the most people at the same time.
So examples like we were talking about a book I was reading that takes place at a bank and like tellers at different heights of and like ones that you could roll up to versus a desk or mirrors in a bathroom that go long ways versus horizontal closed captioning. I think you taught me about touch light switches that were originally and like electric toothbrushes. What else is like good examples of things that are universally designed?
Well, when you think of like touch light switches and how those were, like think about when we were kids, those commercials with like the clapper so that you didn't have to get up and you could go, this just came to me, and you didn't have to like get up and go over to the wall to turn your light off and on. So that, was clearly marketed. I mean, it was like granny in a recliner, all reclined. And when she wanted to take a nap, she just turned everything off and it was gone. And and that sounds great, but like clearly that was designed and marketed for somebody who had decreased mobility, who wasn't going to be able to get up and get over to the light switch.
Mm,
But now we have smart switches, smart light bulbs. Like we don't even have a switch in our house anymore. We have a light bulb that is a smart light bulb connected to my husband's phone, and he can turn the
mhm.
lights off and on while sitting on the couch or also while 4 states away.
Yeah.
And those, like, that piece of technology now is not marketed to a disabled community. It's not marketed to an aging population. It is readily available. I bought them at Target. And it's always interesting that like some things that are developed to support the needs of people who have decreased fine motor skills or a different sensory processing system or decreased mobility, those things that are put in place to support them then become more widely used by even more people. And then you recognize, having closed captioning on your TV is something that's just there. You can turn it off or turn it on, but like you don't have to buy a special TV. You have to download a special
Mhm.
program. You don't have to do anything like that. You just have that available.
And then how do we tie that into access versus accessibility? Because clearly those are things that provide greater access to
hmm
a greater number of people, but in like the terms of what those two words mean, how does that link together?
So when you're looking at universal design as far as like product development or program development, when you design a product or a program in a way that meets the needs of the most people, another great example, um, adult size changing tables.
Mm,
And like we have changing tables in many, many, many public bathrooms. And sure, I can appreciate that like some walls are not long enough and some bathrooms are not big enough. And that is the way it is. But if you have a wall that is long enough for you to put in an adult size changing table, then that adult size changing table holds more weight and holds somebody who is longer. But your 1 year old will also fit on that.
Mm, mhm,
So at when you have a standard size changing table that's dropping down from the wall, that's all fine and good, but there's a weight limit on that. You can only put so much weight. Obviously, a kid can only be so long before they're on there. And then what are you left to do when you have a child who has toileting needs who's bigger than that?
mhm. Or an
So,
adult.
correct, the opportunity to have an adult size changing table that is just there. It's not like, oh, you have to go to this bathroom down here. You have
Mm,
to go do this other thing. You have to go in this room. I mean, I've been in places that have those and they are not actually in a bathroom. They're in a separate room. So you're like, great. So like, where's the sink to wash my hands? And that's having that available better than nothing, likely because you're probably hopefully having some hand sanitizer. This is all coming from people who are prepared to go in a space that doesn't have anything at all. So
mhm,
they're likely a little more prepared in those situations. But when you're looking at like who doesn't benefit from an adult size changing table, it folds up on the wall. It's not taking any space up in your bathroom. Anybody of any age, of any weight, of any size can be on it, within reason, obviously,
mhm,
understanding that there are just going to be some safety concerns in general. Um, but like closed captioning just being available and you can push the button and then the words come up. If that annoys you and it's distracting, you don't want to see it, you can just turn it off and it's that easy. You just turn it off or you can just have it on.
mhm,
And who is hurt by that? Who doesn't benefit from that? And when you start thinking like in those ways, soap dispensers in a bathroom, in a public bathroom that aren't up high, they're down low. So that if you're rolling in there or you're not tall, so are you a
mhm,
grown up who is really short or are you a kid? There isn't this like, I had to get my soap from up here. You just have a
mhm,
soap dispenser because I can reach over here and also maybe it's here at somebody's eye level, but it's there and available.
mhm.
And those things like that doesn't hurt anybody. You've just moved your soap dispenser down a little.
Yeah, just making the choices that you can make when available to you to create a more accessible space for more people. So if you have a bathroom that's large enough, why not get a different kind of changing table? If you have, you know, the kind of bathroom where you can have a vertical mirror versus a horizontal one, or again, something that often comes up between you and I, ramps versus stairs. Like there are some houses or building spaces or some landscape with like high grades where it doesn't make sense to put in a ramp as much as we would like to have one there. Doesn't really make sense, but there are other times when you could. And I think you gave this example in the last episode. There, it is much more difficult to think of a person who cannot use a ramp, but it is much easier to come up with an example of someone who cannot use stairs. So if you're building a brand new building and you've got the landscape in the height grade, I'm getting a little bit above my knowledge here, but if you've got the space available, why not build a ramp versus stairs when possible? And granted, coming from a place of privilege, there are some times when that is not possible, but when it is possible, when you're designing a classroom, when you're designing a bathroom or something like that, like how can you consider the circumstances of more people versus less people?
And I think like bringing that to the school conversation and talking about a phrase that ends up in IEPs a lot is flexible seating.
Mm,
So then you're you're in this meeting, you're potentially having a pretty specific conversation about flexible seating and preferential seating. So those are two phrases that are used a lot, but very rarely do I ever see preferential seating dash What does that mean for this kid specifically? Flexible seating, what does that mean for this kid specifically? So, having some options of where to sit and how to sit in the classroom, that's great. If certain things are beneficial and certain things specifically would benefit somebody, then maybe the next person who reads this IEP who wasn't in this meeting, who didn't hear all these conversations, it might be beneficial for them to read flexible seating standing desk,
Mm,
because then maybe a student learns better when they're standing or they have the opportunity to move. But thinking as an occupational therapist who has worked in schools with flexible seating in general, I really appreciated when it was welcome. And I understand not everybody, it's not for everybody as much as I want it to be for everybody. Um, but when it is welcomed in a space with somebody who does want to move towards more of a universal design structure in a classroom, you don't need to have an occupational therapy evaluation to determine that you pay attention better when you're standing.
mm,
You
mm,
Teachers are smart, they see these kids all the time, they know that that helps. You don't need an occupational therapy evaluation to determine that you could benefit from a band on the bottom of your chair to keep your feet busy so that, you stay seated in your chair. Why couldn't we just put those on the chairs and have a couple of standing desks and maybe a couple of floor chairs in the classroom? And then you don't need a therapy evaluation to determine, what I think that you need. You have these options as a person with a body and a sensory system and a brain. And you get to make that decision for what feels right for you. And giving that freedom and autonomy in a classroom, who doesn't love that?
mhm.
People like the way that feels. Um, and I think that I can also appreciate from somebody who's never had that experience in a classroom, from somebody that has never taught in a classroom like that, been in a classroom like that, experienced a classroom like that. You may think that that's a circus. Like, oh my gosh, these kids have so much freedom. They're all over the place. But when you think about the way bodies and brains work for the most part, when you find the thing that works for you, you're probably just going to stick with it. And maybe the thing that works for you is walking while you're learning. So we got to, be aware of that. But if the thing that works for you is standing, then you're likely not going to be standing, sitting, and laying as this repetitive motion if you're engaged in learning. You'll be standing because that's already what works best for your body and it's there
Mm,
and available. So then it's, approaching from a universal design perspective, just having those things available so that you can have that. Something that is universally designed and widely available is the standing desk that I have that
yeah.
is a motorized standing desk. So I'm
Mhm,
not like trying to fix it myself and raise it and lower it. There are just buttons that I have set to heights. And I frankly never set it down. I always stand at it. Um, but the fact that you could, if I want to have a meeting with somebody and lower it down, I could. Um, but I didn't
mhm,
have to go to like the disability store to go get it. I bought it at Costco because it's just readily available.
mm,
And
mhm.
if it's readily available for an adult who knows that they need it, why can't that be available as an option for a student learning at school?
I was just thinking back to my time in school and how different it might have been for me should those types of options be available. Not that I struggled a ton or anything like that, but I as an adult have learned I am that person that like I process information while my body or my hands are moving. So like walking desks are really helpful. As an adult in a career, being able to take a walking meeting is helpful for me sometimes to be able to like get out and get moving and that helps my brain like think which is really just helpful in general, and had I known that, had I had access to that in school, maybe I would have been a little bit less of a chatty Cathy. Maybe I would have been a little bit less of a distraction because I could have been a little more focused. I mean, who knows? We were kids, but like that just kind of got my wheels turning and from taking that beyond a classroom setting.
Well, and I think if you hear the phrase, like I've worked in schools, I work with school age kids, so I have a different perspective. But when you hear the phrase like ready to learn, to most people, ready to learn is like seated in a chair, feet on the ground, hands on the table.
Mm.
And like
I'm
that
only
is
thinking about that then. I'm only thinking
yeah,
about the rules. Where are
the
my fingers? Are my toes moving? What's uncomfortable and itchy?
yeah. And also, what if that takes all of your energy?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, a story for a different day, stress responses, flight, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Yeah.
And how many kids sit in classrooms making their body look like it should look when they are in that fawn stress response? So, not even in a place of learning. But
Yeah.
story for a different day. Thinking about like what is, just so we don't make this last, an hour, what is the benefit of universal design? Sure, the benefit of universal design is that you're meeting the needs of the most people at the same time with the same program, with the same piece of equipment. You're presenting options ahead of time instead of putting people in a position to have to ask and then maybe be told no, or feel like they are othered because, oh yeah, you can do that, but you have to come like on a different day at a different time. um, having having a universally designed space, having a universally designed program, the result of that, sure, is that these things work better for the most people. The the best part of that though is the result of that. When it works better for the most people at the same time, people feel like they belong. People feel like this space was designed with them in mind, or with their parents in mind, or with their kids in mind, or with their neighbors in mind. And when you feel like a space has been designed for somebody like you, and that people are ready for you to be there based on their program, based on the things that they have in their space, based on how you can get in and out of their space, they're likely going to come back. They want to engage more in a space where they feel like they belong.
Yeah. I think what I heard you, just to attempt to summarize, I think what I heard you say is like the philosophy or the thought of universal design. If you are in a position to have say over classroom design, or any design in any aspect of life, but here we're specifically talking about schools, um, trying to incorporate universal design philosophies whenever possible. And also, I thought this was important too, including details in your IEP whenever possible. So the specifics about, I think the standing desk was the example that you gave there. That way, the next person reading it can see, like, what does flexible seating mean for this kid? Here it means a standing desk, or it means XYZ thing, whenever appropriate. Just trying your best to consider access for most.
And thinking like, if you're if the student is in a classroom with a bunch of just standard desks and chairs, tables and chairs, then having preferential seating can maybe only mean that it is a location in the classroom and it's proximity to something. Is it proximity to the teacher? Is it proximity to the board? Is it whatever it's proximity to? Like, if everything is set up the same, then that's kind of what that can mean. And then when you have like flexible seating options, what does that mean? Does that also kind of mirror what preferential seating looks like? Possibly. I don't think it's intended to be like that. I think the flexible seating is intended to be like you have a different chair to sit in. But then if you're at a standing desk, you don't have a chair. Also,
Yeah.
what are those different chairs that are available? Because the reality of an IEP is that you develop it maybe now, and it is intended to be in place for the next 12 months. So at any given point, you're going to transition to a new classroom with a new teacher who's going to read this report. And the more specific information that they have about things that could be available, then that is only going to help people to have that all there. And also to think, when you write in a supplementary aids and service, and you write use of technology, that doesn't mean that every thing that you do has to be using technology. Like you are not
Mm,
allowed to read a book anymore. That means that you have access to the use of technology.
mm,
So again, if you have flexible seating in your IEP and you do specifically state access to a standing desk, doesn't mean that you don't ever get to sit down throughout the whole school day. It doesn't mean that you can't ever use the floor chair. But what that does tell a teacher is this kid does best when they're standing. I've got to figure out something. And if you don't have access to a standing desk at your school, ask. Also, I understand those things cost money.
right.
So is that going to play a factor? Yeah. Okay. Then what else could we set up in a classroom that could give the kid
Mhm,
the opportunity to stand instead of sit, and kind of
mhm.
problem solving through what that looks like?
Yeah. Do what you can with what you have available to you.
And not restricting access to the kid who doesn't have, what if you don't have an IEP and the kid wants to stand during ELA?
Mhm. What does ELA
Why
mean?
not? English language arts,
Yep. Thank you.
but like math, it doesn't matter. Like whatever that is,
Right.
they want to stand during, who cares what it is? They just want to stand.
Yeah.
It's almost like in some ways, we've come so far in this like individualized process that like these are the kids that get the accommodations. When you think a universally designed classroom almost feels like it reduces the need for some of those accommodations because those accommodations are available for everybody.
Yeah.
And like fluorescent lighting, you're going to be hard pressed to find research that says fluorescent lighting benefits people. I
One.
bet the
Yeah.
fluorescent lighting people have some, probably. That's out there. But you're gonna be hard pressed to find research that says fluorescent lighting is better than any other lighting.
Yeah.
However, it's probably the most affordable thing to be putting in schools because that's what's available.
Mhm,
So if you are extremely sensitive to fluorescent lighting and that is distracting to you and that hurts your eyes and that for whatever reason they have the things that you can put over the light so that softens the lights. There are lots of teachers that just don't use them and they have a bunch of floor lighting. They have
mhm.
lamps. Place of privilege, that all costs money. I'm guessing you're
Yeah.
paying for that yourself. Thanks for
Yeah.
doing that. um, but also those are, when you think about that, we're not just covering the fluorescent light for the one kid because the one kid gets to stay in this one little square because that's the spot where the fluorescent light isn't. You can just do that for everybody because that just works for
Mhm.
people in
Yeah.
general. And again,
Totally.
you walk into a classroom, you walk into a space, and you don't do this because it's really bright. You walk into a space and you're like, oh, this feels really calm.
Mhm,
And when you walk into a space, oh, this feels really calm. It's like you're ready for me because I like this.
mhm.
And already you are building rapport with people you don't even know because they haven't even come into your space yet. And it's not just a classroom, it could be a store or an office or a whatever. But when you have spaces that make people feel calm when they walk in and make people feel like you are ready for me, they're more likely to come back and engage with you.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's great. And I think there's a lot of ways that you can parallel that beyond the classroom. It is a philosophy that could be adopted in the office, at home, like you said, at stores, restaurants, doctor's offices, all of the above.
Well, and just thinking, and to kind of like wrap up from where we started, there is this view of accessibility is like the automatic door button so that the door opens, and the ramp so that you can get in, or the zero depth entry so that you can just roll into a space. That's like, how do you access that? It's like, how do you get there? How do you get in? But then also, like, we just cannot lose sight of, once you're in the space, now what are we doing,
Hmm.
and how are people ready for you once you're in there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Okay,
thanks, Shannon.
thanks for
Appreciate
chatting
it.
about universal design.
Learning a lot as always. Much appreciated.